Welcome to the Autonomous Podcast, a podcast without a manager, a podcast without a host, a podcast that runs itself. Whoa! How do you do that? It's magic, bro. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome, Vinay. Long time no see. You want to tell us a bit about yourself for the people that might not know you?
Sure. So Vinay Gupta got started in software engineering in the late 1980s. I was the project manager for the Ethereum launch, and I spent about half of my career in defense think tanks and energy policy think tanks, working on the big kind of save the world questions about food, shelter, housing, clothing, the real bottom of the pyramid stuff, and also a lot of worst case scenario planning. I project managed the launch of Ethereum in 2015, and I'm now CEO of a company called Mattereum, which is basically doing digital identity for physical things, so that you can make NFTs, which when you trade the NFC, you also trade the legal right to the property that the NFC describes.
That sounds good. And you spent most of your life like in that sort of sector, like the open source, the crypto, and then the humanitarian side.
Yeah, I mean, my first year being paid in cryptocurrency was 1999, so I am OG on this stuff.
And then you figure kind of like, okay, to really get shit done, you need to take the Elon Musk way. You want to share a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I also have a very strong meditation practice. So until I was 30, the vast majority of my output was meditation and Hindu spiritual training. That was most of what I did with my energy. And then after 9/11, I kind of went out into the real world to try and do something about the mess that had been made. And that's kind of what's propelled me since then. So I operated under something kind of like a vow of poverty until 2014. Which is, I swore that I wouldn't do anything for money that I wasn't willing to do for free. That made me homeless probably 3 or 4 times in that period, but those are the rules of the game, right? That was what I had decided was going to be true, and that was what I did, and you pay your money and you take your choice. In 2014, I finally realized that this was cutting my lifespan short. You know, I was 40, I was broke, I'd done a whole bunch of world-changing work, all of which was public domain, but I wasn't making enough of a living to do things like save for retirement. Seen way too many of the kind of previous generation of cultural leaders just get nuked when they got old because they'd been kind of pedaling really hard to stay still their entire lives, and they hadn't built that kind of solid material platform. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to break my own principles here. I'm going to have to go and do like real work for money. Unfortunately, I walked into the Ethereum team, and that's kind of what's become my 4th or 5th career. Here we are. Yeah, it's been a weird adventure. You know, like my life changes very, very rapidly in a way that is not usually true for people that are approaching 50. You know, I'm going to be 49 in January, and I still feel like I'm in the first quarter of my life. Like everything is just open horizons and unanswered questions. I haven't kind of gotten into this position where it's like, you see this with a lot of people in their late 40s, early 50s, where they are just the master of a thing. You ask them when you want to know about that thing and its implications. And they always talk about the past and their past experience. And for me, I find myself still talking 2/3 of the time about, I wonder what happens and I don't know what this is yet. And, you know, I kind of feel like I'm in this weird kind of like perpetually 26 thing of like, okay, now what do we do? Okay, woo! Which, you know, kind of gets a little tiring as you get older, but I think it's also what's allowed me to innovate. Because, you know, this is the 3rd or 4th field that I've made like fundamental innovations in. And it's just like, you know, you keep the pedal to the metal and you keep the foot on the gas and things keep happening and things keep changing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, what actually got you on this path? Like, did you think the meditation took part in your, like, realizing, okay, we need to get our shit together? Or what kind of thing did it?
I mean, for me, there was a very distinct point where it happened, right? So I start meditating when I'm in high school. I get into a really serious habit without any religious or spiritual beliefs. I'm a scientific atheist at that point. And I start meditating, and I do an hour a day for 8 years, more than an hour a day for 8 years, and then my internal dialogue stops. The kind of voice that a lot of people have in their head that describes reality to them, it goes away. I'm like, now what? And nothing had changed. Like, went to work, I did my job, I hung out with my friends, everything was kind of working the way it was before. But I was also in this position where the world seemed like this enormously huge, rich, mysterious experience. Like, whoa! Because all the attention that the internal dialogue normally soaked up, all that attention was now wrapped around the world. Like, whoa! When you really start paying attention to the world is a great and mysterious show. Whoa! So then I went to America to find a guru. Like, I just had a feeling that the path went to America. So I went to America, and in spring of '96, I get introduced to a little old lady in a New Age bookstore. And my friend who took me there kind of walked me over to her, and she turned around, looked at us, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Oh, it's you again." Like, oh! It was just like falling into an old pattern, right? It really seemed like we had known each other forever. She was probably in her 70s at that point, was in mid-70s. And she was just traveling around America, teaching people meditation and other spiritual stuff. Spent a lot of time just beating people over the head about moral issues, like moral, very strong moral training. So I hung out with her for years. Alternated between traveling with her in usually spring to summer and writing flight simulators for a defense contractor for the rest of the year. And I did a lot of traveling as well. I went to Burning Man in 96 would have been my first Burning Man. So at the end of the 90s, I've gotten my life together. All right, I've got a really nice, well-paying job in Chicago working for some web design folks. I'm spending a ton of time meditating. I've got myself a nice girlfriend. I live in a nice little house. And everything is kind of together. Like, okay, this is my life. I'm going to settle down. I'm going to have some kids. I'm going to teach Kriya Yoga. And I'm just going to be like a standard Midwestern professional. And this is going to be my story. And then 9/11 happened. And then it was very, even before 9/11, I knew that something was wrong. Spring of 2001, I had a very, very strong sort of realization that I needed to go and do something about the state of the world. So spring of 2001, I move across America, move to Colorado, get a job working for a Buddhist teacher doing basically web stuff. And then after 9/11, I get a job with an energy policy think tank, contract. And I go from being a web guy to being an energy policy guy and then a defense, security, and resilience analyst. So, that whole transition was very much triggered by the 9/11 process. There was a very concrete sense of like, okay, I need to go and do something differently now. And I guess that was probably, if I think back, I think I probably knew where it was going at Bush versus Gore. That was the point where I really knew that we were on the handcart to hell now. And then I invented the Hexiart in 2002, which kind of put me at the cutting edge of disaster relief stuff. I made a 30-year plan to get the Hexiart into hundreds of millions of people's lives as a refugee shelter. And we're now 20 years into the 30-year plan and making excellent progress. So it's kind of, I don't know if that really answers the question, but at least it kind of gives you some vague notion of the pieces of an answer.
Right, yeah, it does. Yeah, and the Hexiarts keep popping up, and new pods, like what are they called?
Oh yeah, these new space yurts that some guys are building in LA.
Space yurts.
Space yurts. Hexiarts for the homeless. LAlaunchpad.org.
Right, that's going to be in the show notes. That's good to know.
It's a really nice project. Very happy with that. Actual homeless Americans living in actual Hexiarts in Los Angeles, of all places.
Yeah, people have been putting them into tents, like the refugees and the homeless have been living in tents. And this does seem like such a great step forward.
It's much nicer than a tent, that's for sure. And we've proven the design really well at Burning Man. I mean, there are probably 5,000, 10,000 people living in Hexiarts every Burning Man. Kind of hard to count. There's also a thing called a shift pod that is like a second generation Hexiart. There are amps that have like 200 shift pods. So, when you've got hundreds of person days of, tens of thousands, 5,000 people, try to think of this in terms of person years. When you've got, many, many person decades of people staying in hexayards, you eventually get to the point where you trust the design enough that you say, okay, we can use this for homeless people and we're not taking advantage of them. People that have money and options voluntarily choose to do this rather than something else. Eventually you can say, okay, we've tested this and it works. Now let's try it for the next demographic that needs it.
I found the whole conversation on not just this disaster relief stuff, but also the enlightenment and psychedelics. Like, this is how I got first introduced to your work, through that 5-part interview series with the future thinkers, which was like 6 hours of mind-bending talks. Like, awesome. But we are kind of here to talk about Mattereum, so I would like to get more into the, like, how did you get from launching Ethereum to like figuring out, okay, Mattereum is the next step?
So I mentioned that I got paid in cryptocurrency in the 1990s, right? So I spent a year getting paid in a digital currency called eGold that was 100% asset backed. So it was 120 million or 140 million dollars worth of gold in vaults in Canada and I want to say Dubai, and you just had an account that was demarcated in grams of gold, and people could pay you in weight of gold, and if you had enough gold, you could pull it out of the system in the form of bars and coins, which I did one time. So that system was account-based, it was SQL databases, it was a very, very simple transactional frame. On top of that, Ian Grigg, the famous Ian Grigg, built a system called DigiGold. And DigiGold was Chaumian digital cash. So it was an older generation centralized digital cash system, but it was Chaumian digital cash where every gram of DigiGold that you owned gave you the right to a gram of eGold, and the eGold gave you the right to take physical delivery of the gold. This system was running with hundreds of millions of dollars of value in it for the eGold layer, and I can't remember how much DigiGold they minted, but it was a bunch. And I bought DigiGold from Ian way back in the day. And so when we came around to Ethereum, it was like, right, so the obvious thing that we're going to do with this is we're going to issue asset-backed currencies. How did that old DigiGold thing work? So I get in contact with Ian, and I'm like, Ian, DigiGold, how do we build that for the blockchain? And Ian gives you some pointers and gives you some direction. So at the Ethereum Foundation, I'm like, hey, we need to build this legal infrastructure so we can do like asset-backed digital currencies. Nothing got done. Then I moved to Consensus, and among all the other things that I was doing at Consensus, I was also like, hey, asset-backed digital currencies, we should really do this. Nothing really got done. We had some meetings. There was no willingness to commit resources to doing it. So eventually I'm like, look, we need asset-backed digital currencies. We need assets on the Ethereum chain, or we're not going to get into the real world. We're not really going to achieve the change that we want to achieve. So we raise some money and go out and start building it. And that's Mattereum. The first version of Mattereum, we assume that a lot of the legwork on this is going to be done by our customers. So there are going to be customers that are attempting to build things, and we largely will be responsible for dispute resolution and independent audit, and they will do a lot of the legwork around actually onboarding assets and onboarding the kind of value. And then it becomes apparent that we're actually kind of ahead of our market, and we ourselves are going to have to do the legwork of putting the assets on chain. So we build out all of that story, and this is the Mattereum as it currently stands. There's a layer that does kind of abstract arbitration, audit, and all the rest of those kind of structures. And then on top of that, we've built a layer that takes individual physical assets and puts them into the blockchain. And we launched in February. There's a very minimal but real working system with real assets on it on Ethereum main chain right now.
Nice. And that was with the Star Trek dolls?
We got some Star Trek stuff. We got some sculpture, we got some wine. It's basically just odds and ends of things to show the possibility. And then we would have spent our summer onboarding the first 20, 30, $40 million worth of assets. But COVID screwed everything up for both us and our customers, so everything is going way slower than it was.
Right. Problems.
You've been trying to get things done during the COVID period as well. You know how much it's messed people up.
Our world is mostly in the remote work, so it was in some ways easier, I guess, in a bunch of ways.
Physical object handling is not the kind of thing that you want to specialize in during a pandemic. But that's okay, there's a vaccine on the way, so I think by middle of next summer we should be back in a world where everything works the way they ought to.
What do you think was the trouble with people not understanding Mattereum in the EF or the consensus or the Ethereum space in general?
So I think the crux of it is that people think it's impossible. They have an idea that there is a legal world which is ruled by idiots and controlled by broken systems, and then there's a blockchain world where things work properly, and if you can imagine it and code it, you can build it. And there's a strong sense of dualism, that you have kind of the blockchain world and the real world, and the blockchain world works and the real world is broken, and the objective is to build out more and more and more value in the blockchain universe. I am a citizen of the real world, right? Like, I basically made many of the most important innovations by physically picking up things and sewing things. Like the Hexier, which is the majority of the sudden breakthrough work that I've done in the world, I made the Hexier with my hands. My grandfather was a carpenter, and I'm very much a person who is, an engineer where I think that the physical level is important. Like, if we don't get into the real world, we have not solved the problem. So what's led me to is a very different model of where Ethereum fits into the world, which is that I see Ethereum as being a governance layer for the physical world. Abstract value, not currencies that aren't backed by things. I'm talking about carbon, I'm talking about modern slavery, I'm talking about efficient resource allocation in a world which has far too many people and far too little stuff. That this fundamental core thing is what I want to get into. I want to get into the real world, and I want to fix the real world.
Right. Yeah, so let's get into the main topic. I've just read the big deck of Mattereum, and it's amazing. It definitely explains the whole problem with the world very well and proposes a good solution. And so yeah, you want to get into that?
Sure. Let me frame the problem in a very simple way. Actually, I think it'd be helpful to talk about what Mattereum does just at a practical level first, and then we'll wade into how all that stuff fits. So the practical level of Mattereum is that we take a physical object like a bar of gold or a Star Trek collectible, or it could be a piece of real estate in future, and we represent the thing that makes the object valuable as a series of legal claims about the object. I say this is valuable because it was signed by William Shatner, or I say this is valuable because it is an apartment smack bang in the middle of Paris. Then the statement that the thing is valuable, you can represent online in a way that you cannot put the actual direct physical value of the object. Like, I can tell you that this thing is available. The statement is a digital thing, whereas the thing itself is a physical thing, and we don't have good ways of digitizing physical things yet. So what we do is we take a physical object, we wrap it in a series of statements about its valuable attributes, and then we attach each one of those statements to some kind of ability to recover value if the statement isn't true. So that's a very, very simple, primitive in the system. That's our basic Lego brick. And that Lego brick is, it's a smart contract. And attached to the smart contract, there's an extendable array of things called claims. And each one of those claims refers to a data structure stored in IPFS that has supporting evidence for the claim. And there's also an amount of money attached to the claim. You can pull down on that pool of money if you've paid into it. I put some money into a claim to buy essentially a warranty or insurance, depending on how it's legally implemented at that point. And then once I've done that, if the object is not as described in the claim document, I can pull money down from the system. Right? That basic structure, it could be escrow, which is expensive, or it could be a real-world court claim, or it could be tokens in an asset-backed currency. It could be one of 57 different things that absolutely allow you to retrieve the value. But the critical thing is that every statement being made about an object is backed by retrievable value. And that basic primitive is so far down the stack, it's almost at the level of being like a cryptographic key. It's like you have your crypto keys, and then you have attributes that are attached to a crypto key. So the Mattereum stuff is basically like attaching attributes to a crypto key in a way that binds that crypto key to physical world stuff. It's really, really, really a very primal operation, very much like signing somebody else's key would be in an X509 system, or any one of these like cryptographic primitives. Does that sort of make sense as a starting point? So that's the piton, right? That's the metal spike that we're hammering into the granite wall that we're going to climb, and everything then hangs off that metal spike. Because once we've got the ability to name physical matter in a cryptographically compelling way, once you can name the animals, the next thing that comes after that is you can start to organize them, right? And now you can bring in the whole kind of Ethereum mindset with, DACs and DAOs and smart contracts and decentralization and, all the rest of the intellectual architecture of Mattereum, Ethereum shelling points. And you know what I'm saying? Like there's a big kind of standard Ethereum conceptual toolkit. So you take the entire standard Ethereum conceptual toolkit, and then you add to it this one new primitive, which is, by the way, you can apply that whole toolkit to physical things. So I want to bound that. So as we talk about how we're going to solve the world's problems, this is the machine that we're going to use to solve the world's problems. It's the entire Ethereum conceptual toolkit, plus a single new instrument, which is the ability to apply that toolkit to assets in the real world in a way that real-world governments and courts will regard as legitimate by default.
Right.
So the hard work of Mattereum is building out an extraordinarily strong jetty, like a pier, which allows us to walk goods legally into the blockchain space, move them around in the blockchain space, walk them back out into the real world, and then physically go and take control of the goods with full government support from institutions like police and courts. Right? And that's the part that the Ethereum people are like, what? That part seems impossible.
Code isn't law?
Right. Well, I mean, the assumption they've made is that law is never going to support the smart contract as a fundamental operator. The whole thing that they worked out when they were doing Eagle back in the day was that if you're extremely precise in your approach to law, law is perfectly happy to support your smart contract. You just have to represent the smart contract to the lawyers in a way that the smart contract is correctly represented by the legal contract. And once you've done that, the world's courts are suddenly your friends rather than your enemies. It's just the thing has to fit perfectly into the legal frame and perfectly into the blockchain frame before you can get this fluid interoperability between legal systems and blockchain systems. Needless to say, this has been really freaking hard, which is why it's taken us years. But we got to the point where we could do the first stuff successfully in February, and by now we'd have tens of millions of assets in the system so that you could literally buy and sell Star Trek toys, gold bars, fine art, bottles of wine, buy the whole object, tokenize the object, securitize the tokens, buy and sell the tokens. All of that machinery, right, would exist by now if COVID hadn't brought the world to a grinding freaking halt. Because in the real world, things are real slow. So, any more questions about that kind of toolkit level before we wade into the applications?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, where are those items? Like, can people actually browse them and buy them already?
Yeah, sure. So if you go to mattereum.com/about, you can see the first, I don't know, I think 8 or 9 items we have on there. You can buy a warranty that the item is real, but if you want to take legal possession of it, you need to contact the person that owns it. So the selling part of it, we have not built out everything that you need to make the sale cleanly online. It's not particularly difficult to do with reasonable security, but with almost absolute security, that requires us to do a little bit more legal engineering. So it works well enough for now, but before we wanted to have a point-and-click interface to buy the stuff, we want to finish just a wee bit more legal work to make sure that that is properly airtight.
Got it.
Same thing with the self-service tools. So there should be self-service tools so you can bring your assets and you can just put them on chain yourself. We're not going to release the self-service tools until we figure out a good way of making sure that people don't blow their own leg off and create real legal liability for themselves by vouching for something stupid.
Right.
There's a little bit of care to be applied. But we've got the object authentication stuff. Object transfer is then easy once you have the object authenticated, but making sure that it's not challenged by things like local consumer protection law is the tricky part. So if you buy one of these things on the blockchain, and then the physical item is in Germany, you're in Germany, and you make a claim under German consumer protection law, now we're faced with attempting to roll back a blockchain transaction. So we need a little bit more legal engineering to make sure that everybody understands exactly how they're going to interface with things like consumer protection law. At that point, it's full on. So if that's all clear, let's go and then talk about what the big deck says about what the world's problems are.
Let's do it.
So the meta problem, I know you guys like your meta, right? So the meta problem is that capitalism is extractive at one end and polluting at the other. So if there was no violent extraction of resources that destroyed the future of nature in one end of capitalism, if capitalism wasn't screwing over the planet and screwing over the people, particularly the citizens of the future, then we wouldn't really have any problems in capitalism at that end. Likewise, at the other end of capitalism, where we've had the goods, we've had the services, we've had the experiences, that end of capitalism, if that process produces no pollution, no waste, you don't have any problem there either. So if we can engineer out of capitalism the extraction at one end and the pollution at the other, there's no reason that you can't continue to run this amazing economic machine long into the future. So a capitalism without either extraction or waste is a sustainable capitalism. If we don't get a sustainable capitalism, we're going to destroy first the world's ecology, then its economy, then its humans. It's a bad ride to be on the current thing, so we have to get out of this position as quickly as we can. So then let's break that down a little further in terms of how we got into this enormous mess. Capitalism is a four-step process: investment, production, consumption, waste. And most of the time when people were analyzing capitalism, they only really look at investment, consumption, and production. Nobody really thinks about waste. You know, I invest some money, it builds a factory, the factory sells a bunch of stuff into the marketplace, I get a return on investment from that, and then I use that to build another factory. That's usually all the thinking that we do. And the extraction involved in industrial consumption, it's like, hey, we're pulling all this oil out of the ground, we're pulling all this coal out of the ground, we've got all these people that are working in our factory for 50 hours a week rather than going out and getting college educations, part one. And then part two, all of these consumer goods wind up in landfills, and all of the energy winds up as carbon polluting the atmosphere. So the investment system went through numerical optimization really in the 1980s. That's when we got quantitative finance, and we began to apply massively top-flight engineering talent to designing mathematically optimal strategies for investing money. Yesterday's revolution works like a charm, off you go. In the 1950s, we did exactly the same thing for engineering of physical goods. So that revolution happens in several stages. Some parts of it might go back as the early days of the Industrial Revolution, but the fundamental driver is we build statistical models of industrial production, and we use those statistical models to engineer the goods for reliability. So in the old days, when you did industrial production, 5% of the stuff that came off the end of the production line wouldn't work properly. Could be as high as 20%. And then you would take those goods, you'd examine them, you'd figure out why they didn't work, and you'd put them back into the production line at the place where they got broken, and then they would do what they called rework or remanufacturing, where they would repair them eventually to try and make them ready for sale again. And the quality control guys got hold of this and like, okay, the objective is zero rework. The objective is to get every single step in the process correct, so that at the end of it, you put in the raw materials and you get the same amount of manufactured goods. And that process is why you can buy a cell phone for $40. Every component of the 100,000 components that goes into a cell phone, every transistor has to be perfect, because if one of them isn't, the rest of the components in the phone are junk and you have to throw it away. You could put up with a couple of dead pixels, but that's about as much slack as there is in that system. So we got here because our manufacturing processes are essentially perfect in the areas where we care. In the areas that make money, but not even there, right? If people stop caring, soon enough the making money breaks down too. So like, Boeing? Boeing's recently had this problem that Boeing has gone from the safest aircraft in the world to a terrifying risk. Boeing planes kept falling out of the skies, right? You don't think, I'm really afraid I'm getting on a Boeing. Like, that is the last thing that you want an aircraft manufacturer to develop a reputation for. Particularly when it used to be the best aircraft manufacturer in the world, right? So that's an example of quality control gone wrong. We stopped paying attention, we stopped caring, the goods became unreliable. Numerical optimization of investment processes, numerical optimization of manufacturing, the production processes. Reasonable so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so then, numerical optimization of sales. That's targeted advertising. So the entire massive edifice of Google, Facebook, Amazon, that entire pattern of activity rests on targeted advertising. And the targeted advertising is the attempt to use statistical process control techniques to purchasing behavior. Get an enormous database, predict consumer preference, show them adverts which you expect to make them buy. It's the same mindset of massive data sets, intensive numerical mashing, production of extremely high quality models, and then investment of resources backing those models. It's exactly the same thing that we did for investment, for production, and now we've done it for sales. Sales being the gap between production and consumption. Then once you buy the stuff, look at a thing that I can see in your video, right? I can see right now you have a microphone and a microphone stand. Do you have any idea where that stuff came from? Or is it just you bought it and then you kind of forgot where you got it and now it just lives there?
Yeah, eBay. It came somewhere from China. Nobody knows where.
And at that point, if you don't have any data about it, how can we do any kind of statistical process control about it? You don't know whether that microphone has an expected service life of 3 months or 3 years. Just guessing. It could be 30 years. Even worse, the manufacturer is just guessing. Because once they've taken these goods and thrown them out into the world, there's no return path for data on the performance of the goods. For all you know, and for all they know, they have a quality control problem and all the microphones stop working after 18 months. They themselves can never find that out because there's no return path for the data. There's an outgoing path, which is the selling of it. There's an incoming path for money, but there's no incoming path for data. So as a result, because we don't have high quality data coming back from consumers to manufacturers about the performance of the goods, we don't have any kind of systematic ability to optimize the consumption processes in a way that produces higher quality of life for the consumers, lower waste for the producers, and overall a dramatic improvement in the relationship we have with the material world. And there is one shining exception to this, which is Amazon reviews. So, I don't know, do you cook much?
Not really.
So back in the prime of the early days of Ethereum, when everybody was running around building the social networks that we now rely on, I spent probably 2 years hosting a dinner for about a dozen people every 2 weeks. These things were semi-famous. They were a ton of fun. Over the course of a couple of years, I got reasonably good at cooking. I mean, other people were much better than I was, but, I could comfortably cook for 12 or 14 people with very little notice and just, boom, there's dinner. So that process required buying quite a lot of kitchen crap. Big metal pots and, oven trays and, just the battle rattle of a real kitchen. What I discovered was anything that has about 1,000 4.5-star reviews on Amazon will be perfect. will just be flawless. Everything will work. And what I noticed is that a lot of the kitchen companies that used to produce kind of not very reliable stuff that wasn't that great have upgraded their quality and upgraded their quality and upgraded their quality and upgraded their quality, because the total pushback from Amazon, like if your stuff is even slightly dysfunctional, you get a whole pile of 3-star and 2-star reviews. Your stuff drops off the Amazon front page, and at that point you might as well not exist. So what we've got is this enormous pressure to improve the quality of consumer goods based on the limited return path, which is Amazon reviews. Imagine rather than having a limited return path, we had a truly excellent high bandwidth return path. If we had that, we could do this intensive optimization of the consumption factor in the same way that we did it for production and for investment.
Right. Massive optimization.
And that optimization, so like, how are we going to handle CO2 for the world? How are we going to get our environmental footprint under control when we've got a gigantic number of rich people already whose environmental footprints are titanic, and we're adding more rich people every day because capitalism is pulling people out of poverty? You know, the global middle class is growing really quickly. How are we going to provide goods for all the people that now have purchasing power without destroying the planet?
Right. I have a feeling that not many people are thinking about it this way. Like, if you make many people rich, that's actually kind of a problem.
Well, I mean, if it was 1 million people, it'd be all right. But, like, most of the citizens of Europe are at 4 planets worth of environmental consumption right now. 3 or 4 planets. Even the French, with all their nuclear, electric, everything, are still at more than twice the sustainable level of carbon emissions. Americans average 17 tons of CO2 per person per year, and my estimate is the sustainable level is 2 tons of CO2 per person per year. So how are we going to do the necessary cleanup, even if we go to a world where solar panels are incredibly cheap and we've just got tons of cheap solar electricity? We still can't turn solar electricity into tables and chairs and laptops and light bulbs and roofs. You know, we still need to get factor 10 reduction in the amount of material stuff that we consume to maintain a roughly equivalent quality of life. It's not impossible. I mean, if you think about how much material crap the cell phone has replaced, it's probably 50 kilograms of stuff that you no longer need to manufacture because the cell phone does all of it. So we could do this for a whole bunch of other systems, and we could produce higher quality of life on a massively reduced environmental footprint. But to get there, we need data.
More data on all the products being sold, right? And that is exactly where Mattereum comes in.
Data on the products being sold, data on the products being resold. So, talk about second-hand markets. Here we have, and sorry if you're listening, you can't see this, but I'm going to wave this thing around, and I just dropped it. So, here I have a 10-gram piece of gold, right? And this was produced by a company that takes gold out of catalytic converters, melts it down, and sells it on eBay, weirdly enough. So, you know that piece of gold is real because it's got a set of attributes which are only identified on gold. It has a hallmark, it has a certificate of authenticity, it's gold. And that is now a thing that I can resell because it has a data trail attached to it. So some assets have a data trail and you can resell them with the data trail. And those are the assets which are actually assets. Everything else, right, if you try and resell your microphone, probably it's almost as easy for somebody to buy a new one from eBay than it is to buy that one, because the one from eBay comes with a set of data that describes the current performance and conditions of the microphone, and it comes with some kind of warranty, and it comes with dispute resolution. So the first sale has a warranty, it has an accurate description of the goods, and it has dispute resolution. So that second sale, once you're making the second sale, you have to provide the warranty, and usually you don't have any of the legal infrastructure for doing that. You have to provide the description of the goods. Again, usually that's going to be a screenshot of the page that you bought it from, and you saying, by the way, it's in the same condition it was when I bought it. some other kind of imprecise description. And then the third thing is the dispute resolution, which will usually be very much less effective for second-hand goods than for new goods. So for new goods, you typically go to the manufacturer and say, hey, this is broken, and they just give you a new one, and they take the old one back. They figure out why it's broken, and then they try and modify their production process. Once you've got second-hand goods, you take it back to the person that sold it to you, and you say, hey, it's broken, and they say, I tested it before I gave it to you. It must have broken with you, and now you have a dispute. And the platform dispute resolution for second-hand goods is, generally speaking, terrible. The result of that is that we are bleeding natural resources and money. So your microphone is probably good for 30 years. Very plausibly, it's good for 30 years. However, it's unlikely to last for 30 years because you're going to move house or you're going to buy a new one, because you're upgrading, or 51 things could happen that will cause you to want rid of that microphone. And in all probability, you're going to wind up giving it away rather than selling it because it's worth so little with the crappy descriptions and crappy dispute resolution and crappy warranty that you as an individual can provide, that it's better to give it away for social capital than it is to try and sell it for financial capital. And what's happening as a result of that is that we don't have the incentives with the manufacturers to produce high-quality goods which last forever and retain their value with every single one of these secondary sales. The manufacturers are incentivized to make goods which you're going to use until you're done with, and then you're just going to give it to somebody else. So to get this kind of economy of permanence, we need the manufacturers to be incentivized to produce goods that run forever, and then for you as a buyer, you buy the goods. That microphone has a 30-year lifespan and you've owned it for 2 years. It's got 28 years left on the clock. It ought to be worth like 95% of what you paid for it. 95% of the service life, 95% of the cost. And at this point, we become custodians of assets rather than being part of this take, make, waste cycle. Everything you buy, you expect to sell. This totally changes our relationship with the physical world because everything we buy, we expect to sell. When we buy things, we're not consuming them, we're investing in them. High quality. If you're going to resell it, you're not a consumer, you're an investor. I've invested in this jacket. I am going to wear this jacket. Eventually, this jacket will be the wrong size. I'll be too thin, I'll be too fat, I'll go work out and put on a bunch of muscle. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this jacket. I'm going to sell it to somebody, and then I'm going to buy another one that fits. And if the goods have an exact description of their quality and their appearance and their performance, if we know exactly how they work, there's no problem buying these things secondhand. I'm wearing secondhand jeans right now because I kind of try and buy secondhand stuff partly for ecological reasons and partly for market research. eBay has a super liquid market for 1970s and 1980s and 1990s denim jeans, Levi's. And those jeans have been worn off and on for decades by different people. They're still perfect. They were made to last, and they really do last. But the vast majority of people don't want to wear the same pair of jeans for 25 years. They change their style, they get older and fatter, they, just their life changes and they want something different. But the fabrics are so good and the stitching is so good and the quality is so good that these things are still kicking around on eBay for about $25 in every possible style and sale, sold by enormous warehouses that do nothing other than buy and sell denim jeans and grade them as they come through. Right? We've already got a kind of permanent economy for denim. And I have no doubt at all that I could, sell these jeans back to the people that sold them to me for pretty much what I paid for them, and they just put them around the loop one more time. After the fact that eBay takes 20% of the cost of the goods on the way through, 10% of the goods plus a whole bunch of faffing around, that friction on this circular economy process is what causes the circular economy to not exist properly. For the circular economy to really work, it has to be practically friction-free, so that each buyer only pays a little bit of the cost of the whole process, rather than us being in a position where every buyer has to front the cost of goods plus another 20 or 30% to make up for the friction in the process. Sorry, I feel like I'm ranting about this stuff because it's all inside of my head. It's just it all makes perfect sense to me. You must see this, yeah. So I apologize if I'm ranting, but I'm kind of super into this stuff right now.
No, that's great. But yeah, I wanted to ask about other things like efficient secondary markets and circular economy. That's a huge part of what we need to fix the world. So what are the other options and things that we need to do besides that?
Okay, so investment, production, consumption, waste. Efficient consumption, the goods never become waste because they're sold and they're sold and they're sold and they're sold and they're sold. And by the time they eventually become waste, they've wound up in, the slum of some poor third world country where somebody bought it for 50 cents, used it until it broke, and the object has finally hit end of life. That process is how we manage the material footprint of the human race. We cannot feed and clothe and house the world in an economy which is consumption-based. Everything has to be an investment. And this idea that we have to unmake the consumption economy and replace it with an investor economy, this is a fundamental transformation in how we think about capitalism. I am not consuming goods, I'm investing in goods. I've invested in this microphone. This microphone is a tool. I use this tool to make things. Those things eventually pay for my kids' education. Amazing. Now, I'm going to sell the thing that I invested in to somebody else. They are going to buy it as an investment. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Consumption is a thing that we cannot afford in a world with 1 billion starving people. Investment is how we turn what we have and what we need into more of what we have and what we need. Everything that we buy ought to be something that generates wealth, not just for us, but also for the world. And if we take this mindset of a permanent investment economy rather than a consumption economy, you can begin to figure out how to close the loops on the circular economy, because the thing about investors is investors hate losing money. If we hate losing money because our goods are degrading and then being thrown away rather than sold, pretty soon we're not going to buy those goods if there are alternatives. And the manufacturers are not going to run out of customers because we've got 7 billion people and most of them are incredibly poor, which means they have no stuff. So we need to retool the machinery so every object purchased is an investment and it's resold until the poorest people in the world have everything that they need to be pretty comfortable and enjoy their lives. See how radical this is? Consumption as a concept must die.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it should be like a hard sell to people to tell them, okay, this is an investment. Stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like an investor.
This is the key to the story, right? We invest our money and our natural resources in making tools that generate more wealth, and we turn the handle on that machinery to turn wealth into more wealth until the entire world is taken care of, and every step on the way is profitable. If that is not the soul of capitalism, I don't know what is. Consumerism is in many ways a crime against capitalism because consumption in the classical model destroys capital.
Right. It turns it into waste.
You start with capital and you turn it into waste. Why did anybody ever think that was a good idea? Start with capital and you turn it into more capital. Do that as long as you can until the physical base breaks down and the genes wear through or the microphone stops working. Until that happens, all that you're doing is investment and reinvestment. You're never getting into this pattern we call consumption. So I think the entire model of a consumer economy is just a historical accident because we didn't have good enough international markets to soak up all the amazing stuff the Americans were making in the 1950s and 60s.
So if it makes economic sense for the capitalists, why is it not being done already?
It is for certain kinds of goods, right? So if you're buying, for example, industrial tools, almost nobody buys industrial tools like, say, an industrial hammer. The big things you use for forging tools? Almost nobody buys that thing with the expectation that they're going to use it until it breaks. They're going to use it until a better one comes along or until they open another location or until they need to standardize the equipment in their fleet. All of that sort of stuff. They're never just going to buy this and we're going to use it till it breaks. So in the areas where it matters, big stuff, right? Take
laptops in a big company. They buy the laptops, and at the end of that process, they've got some guy that comes and collects them all, pays the company some money, and then resells them. Erases them, resells them. They wind up on eBay. You know, you buy old IBM laptops on eBay, you could be the fourth owner, and you don't care because that thing still works like new. You know, we've already got, for corporations' equipment that they use, a very substantial degree of this kind of permanent economy. You know those kind of, the Herman Miller chairs, the Aerons, which are like the standard chair for .coms?
How long do those things hold their value? The chair's good for 30 years. You just buy those things used for your office when you need them because they're exactly the same as new. And the value reflects that. You know, new they're about $800, used they used to be about $650. And that model is economy of permanence. They're so well made, they don't wear out. You're not going to burn your investors' money buying these things new, but your staff complain if you try and put them on crappy Office Depot chairs.
I'm a programmer. I have a keyboard. Where's my Aeron? And that was like the standard mindset in the old economy. That was what it was to be like Silicon Valley. The chair was as much a part of your working tool as your monitor was. Right? This is my workstation. Where is my good chair? Come on, guys. You know, what kind of company is this? Right? And that thing, and you know, you see what I mean about like, there was just a pool of these chairs in circulation in cities like San Francisco and London. And, you know, your startup would buy them and then your staff would sit in them. And then your company would either succeed and sell them when you moved into a furnished office, or, you know, you would go bankrupt and then you'd sell them as part of the bankruptcy deal. There was just a static pool because nobody ever throws out a chair of that quality, right? And the thing about them making money, I remember doing the business case for this one time, where I just worked out that if we got 5 minutes a day more productivity out of people, then the chairs paid for themselves in like 8 months. 5 minutes a day.
You're right. Yeah, definitely sounds worth it.
And well, that's why we wind up with a culture where people manufacture office chairs at that level of quality and expense. They do it because it pays. They're an investment. They're an investment in staff productivity. So do you get a sense of this model of it's an investor economy rather than a consumer economy?
Yeah, right.
And that's the core of what I have to say, is if you collect good enough data about consumption, you stop doing consumption as a waste stream and you start doing consumption as an investment stream. And that's basically it. I mean, that's my crazy man story about the future. Everything else is details.
Sounds simple enough. Let's see how it happens. And there was also a bit about social enterprises and triple bottom line accounting and things like that. You want to touch on that, how that plays a role?
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about kinds of capital. That's the place to start. So in the big deck, we talk about investment, production, consumption, and waste, and then we split investment into natural capital and financial capital, and we split waste into waste and co-products. So, you know, like recycling, reuse, resale, all this stuff. Now, this gets a little fiddly because there are actually at least 4 kinds of capital, depending on how you count, there are 6 or 8. So the classic model is natural capital, financial capital, physical capital, which is things like hard to replicate machines, like CERN. CERN is physical capital, you can't just turn money into another CERN. And then there's social capital, which is kind of like human beings and their relationships. And to think of human beings and their relationships as capital is already sort of inherently evil. Like, that's not something you should think of as capital. You could probably also apply this to natural capital. Like, really? Are we just valuing this as capital? Maybe. So there are definitely some reasons for, you know, conservatism in thinking about these things as capital. Right? That is, you know, it's not a great way of doing things, but that model is also 25 years old. So the capital conversion matrix is a way of thinking about enterprises which have multiple kinds of capital inside of them. So if you have 3 kinds of capital that your organization runs on, right? You've got social capital, you've got financial capital, and you've got natural capital, then you have a thing which is a 3x3 matrix, right? social, financial, and natural capital go in on one axis, and social, natural, and financial capital come out on the other axis. And what you have is a transformation matrix. So if we have the social capital and we turn the social capital into financial capital through things like sales, and we 2x our financial capital in the process, if that process is clean, we're doubling our financial capital, but we're not depleting our social capital. And this is winning, right? But if we run that process where we double our financial capital, but we're slowly destroying our brand because we're making promises we can't keep and everything is getting trashed, in that situation, what is happening is that we are running out of social capital, and eventually our company becomes social capital bankrupt, which is to say nobody believes our promises anymore and our brand is worthless. Right? And this is the sort of thing which is happening to Boeing right now, because Boeing has trashed many decades of excellent social capital as being the world's best maker of airplanes by producing airplanes which are so bad they're unworthy of the name Boeing. And that's a social capital bankruptcy, which in Boeing's case may be rapidly followed by a financial capital bankruptcy. Like, this is a bad scene. So this notion of a social and financial capital relationship also applies to natural capital, right? If we buy wood and then we make things out of the wood and we sell the things, that machine only runs until we run out of wood. And when there's no more wood to be had because we've cut down the last tree, we're going to have much worse problems than running out of furniture. And this is the capital conversion matrix. It's a way of thinking about, are we depleting one kind of capital as we try and create another kind of capital? And how can we have multiple kinds of capital support each other in a kind of interrelated way? Does that sort of make sense?
Yep.
So that model, you want to run businesses that use all of their kinds of capital efficiently. And the ideal world is that you turn social capital into financial capital through sales, and financial capital into social capital by building strong networks. And if you get that right, you could create brands like, say, Grameen Phone, which used very strong social networks to sell phones cheaply, and because they provided excellent phones with good service packages and everybody loved it, they could then spend their financial capital building out this social structure where, they would throw parties, they would have events, everybody would come together to do things, and that made it easier for them to sell phones in future, right? Stronger societies with more phones was a big win for Grameen Phone. And again, we can run the world on a permanent investment basis rather than a consumption basis by making sure that we never deplete the social capital in the process of making financial capital. If you don't screw people over and you make them money, they will keep on good terms with you.
Right. And you'll even grow the social capital.
Precisely.
Trying to think if there's any other questions that I'd like to touch on before I ask you about your advice for metagame. Is there anything you want to share before we get to that?
So there's one last little detail here, which is this. A lot of times the manufacturers have been very scared of manufacturing things which are permanent because the feeling is that they need people to upgrade every few years to keep the world working, right? If we don't sell a new phone to each person every 3 years, eventually we're going to have a problem. So they don't make 30-year phones. And, certainly in areas where the technology is improving very rapidly, you think like 30-year phone, probably not a great plan because it's going to be an absolute antique. But this is why upgradeability is so important. So until every single person in the world has a phone, it doesn't matter how crappy the phone is, there's a market for that phone. Your phone just has to be cheaper than the equivalent new phone in order for your phone to sell if your phone has excellent data attached to it to tell you whether or not it's real or not, to tell you whether or not it works or not. So what this creates is a different model, which is there is an infinite sink of demand, which is until every human being has one of everything that you sell, there will be a second-hand market for your goods somewhere in the world at some price. And if we can efficiently access those second-hand markets, now think of high-end digital cameras, right? I shoot old digital camera gear because I got it 10 years ago and I really like it. The Nikon 1 range. And the Nikon 1 cameras, they're tiny cameras. They're even smaller than most of the interchangeable lens stuff. They're smaller than Micro Four Thirds. They have a tiny little sensor. The sensor is 10 years old. The color rendering is beautiful. The images are incredibly sharp, but it shoots at like 10 megapixels or 16 megapixels. It doesn't have great low light performance, but the images in daylight look like they were taken on a big DSLR. They're just fantastic. So those camera bodies are now like $100 on eBay, right? The lenses are like $100 on eBay, down from the $600 or $800 that those things would have been when they were new. And as a result, there's a whole community of people that are still shooting these things and using these things and extending the life of these things because the gear was manufactured with the quality where it will keep running. 10, 15 years from now, I think those cameras will still be in use, but mostly they're going to be in developing world contexts, right? The phone cameras will improve and improve and improve, but there's only so much you can do with the glass on a phone. So when you really need a good quality image, you're going to wind up using a big lens. And the thing that I'm kind of trying to illustrate here is we're already 10 years into the life of those goods, and they're still valuable. Even in the age of phone cameras, they're still valuable. If they'd been manufactured to slightly lower quality and they'd broken by now, they would have zero value. So it's not that Nikon is losing new camera sales because those cameras exist, right? If I buy a 10-year-old Nikon camera body and the images are great, I am now a customer for life for Nikon's new equipment. I'm going to buy another Nikon camera body. When I'm done with this one and I give it to my kid, or I give it to my cousin, or I sell it back on the market because there is an efficient market, the odds are that I'm going to buy another camera from that brand because I know these things are great. And that tail is the long tail, the long life of these goods, where although Nikon is not making a financial capital return on those second-hand goods, they are getting an excellent social capital return. This is the key point. So excellent quality second-hand goods in most contexts are not going to generate a direct financial return on investment to the manufacturers. But that doesn't mean that they can't. We could do some engineering on the blockchain to enable people to receive a nick every time that their second-hand goods are sold. You could make a micropayment to the original manufacturer. That would be great. It's an excellent incentive for permanence. But also, the social capital return from quality goods being sold over and over again and still being in great condition and still working fantastically, all of that is essentially the best possible quality free advertising, which is, I bought one and I used it and it was great, and if I ever have enough money to buy a new one, I'm going to buy a new one from those guys. This kind of brand value, it's inevitably going to be a middle-class world filled with aspiration. We've got the cheap solar panels, we're going to figure out our waste problem, and once we've figured out the solar panels and the waste problem, we've kind of got control of the global economy so we're no longer destroying things and ourselves. What you're going to be left with is a world of constant upward mobility and aspiration as wealth builds on wealth, builds on wealth, builds on wealth, in an environment where we've decoupled the generation of wealth from the destruction of nature or society. And at that point, the enormous value in durable goods as evidence that the brand has good intent and excellent engineering, I think that's going to become a huge part of what makes brands valuable. So that was the last thing that I wanted to talk about. Make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, yeah. Like, people take brands seriously, and like Apple wouldn't be where it is if people cared about the phone more than they cared about the brand. I mean, they make great phones, but yeah, you see what I mean.
I do see what you mean. And I mean, there's an entire world of people that just buy whatever it is that Apple makes that sort of looks like what they need. They assume that the Apple one will be the best one available, and they just buy the Apple one.
Right. Yeah, they don't even read into the spec or whatever. They just assume it's the best and they buy it. And that's great capital.
I'm paying, 30% more than I'd pay if I bought an Android one, but I'm never going to make a mistake. So at that point, I'm just going to buy whatever it is that Apple sells. And that's a huge number of people. They built a $2 trillion company on people that wanted to buy technology but didn't want to learn about technology. And, everybody's like that. Like, we know tech. Do you know bicycles? I don't know bicycles, right? I don't really know, like there are lots of things that I don't know. Printers. I don't really know printers.
Right. I don't even want to know. Like, I want to buy one that works and it's very good. Like, I don't want to do market research into like all the technical details when I'm buying one. Like, I just want a great one.
Just want a great one, right? And what makes a great one great isn't just its immediate performance; it's its performance in 2 years. I want to buy one and I want to solve the problem and I want the problem to stay solved. And this was the whole revolution with eBay, not eBay, Amazon reviews. Amazon reviews gave us really strong evidence about whether this was the great one. And I think that's created an enormous amount of competition at the top to try and produce these things that will successfully get that magic 1,000 5-star reviews. And, this is part of healing the world, is that we just have to stop manufacturing garbage. How hard is it? So that was, that was the last thing I had to say. That's my story.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it might even not be just about the quality of the product itself, but about the brand image of the company. Like, you're gonna buy a Tesla because they're doing great progress in going over to the renewables and all of that. But like, fuck you, Volkswagen. I'm not gonna buy Volkswagen. Like, you cheated on your CO2 test. Like, I'm never gonna buy your car. Like,
if you screwed over the CO2 testing guy, maybe you're going to screw me over too. That sounds good. Yeah, rock solid. So the thing that I really want people to leave this with, right? And I just wrote a book about this called The Future of Stuff.
I didn't know.
Yeah. So I just wrote a book called The Future of Stuff. It's on sale now. It's really short. It's part of a series of these little pocket books, and it talks about all this stuff in a bunch more detail. So the thing that I really want people to kind of feel is that throwing things away is not natural. Nature, okay, things get thrown away in nature, but everything that gets thrown away in nature winds up as food for something else. There is no notion of just landfill uselessness and that's the end of the story. Even a skeleton eventually turns into a tree. And that unnatural feeling of like, what do you mean this is just thrown away and it has no further value and nothing eats it and nothing uses it? It just sits there forever rotting. Like, that should give us a weird, creepy feeling, like walking through a graveyard, only worse.
Yeah, it doesn't exist in nature.
Right? And, it's like, okay, well, we better learn how to figure out how to stop doing that, right? Either we make these things such that something can eat them, or we make some things which are capable of eating these things. Is it Sweden or Norway? They're running their country on garbage burning. They built these amazing super high temperature incinerators where you can throw in pretty much anything that's basically made of carbon, and it will burn it very efficiently and very cleanly, and you don't get much pollution off these things. You don't get, if you've got low temperature fire, you get a whole bunch of poisonous chemicals. If you've got high temperature fire, all you get is carbon dioxide or water at the far end of it. And they've just got these enormous garbage burning factories that are that's like half of their national grid or something crazy. And it's like, that's a really ugly way of closing the loop, but it does close the loop.
Don't forget the plastic eating fungi.
Oh, yeah. Plastic eating fungi, magic worms that eat I mean, let's not get me started on the plastic recycling rabbit hole. I could go an hour just on plastic recycling. Let us talk about metagame.
Yeah, so the last time I think we seriously spoke about metagame is when I was basically just starting it. And you were like, oh, we're gonna do like reputation? No, don't do reputation. Like, no scoring of humans. That's not the way to go. Just use insurance like grown-ups.
Yes, sir.
And yeah, I took that advice seriously, and there's definitely never going to be like rate this person 1 out of 5.
Good. I'm so happy to hear that. And doesn't it feel good to have a system where people aren't just spying on each other and rewarding each other with magic likes that are not related to performance but are just related to social capital?
Yeah, I was thinking originally that people would only be able to rate other people if they enter the economic contract, but that's still like just crap. But yeah, you were rewarded a bunch of seeds that long time ago when you gave me that advice and a bunch of others, and you never actually claimed them, and they actually started pumping a few days ago. They got from first they went from $5 to $9 in a matter of a week, and then from $9 to 18 in one day, then 25, then 60, and then yesterday they hit 80.
Good Lord. I don't even know how many seeds I have. Do you have any idea?
I think it was like 20 or 30.
Wow, look at that. Goodness gracious, it's enough money to pay for a vacation.
Yeah, you got like $1,000 for talking to me for an hour.
Woohoo. Yeah, it's capital. So tell me how the project is going, because I mean, I was taking a look over the wiki. The wiki is fabulous. Like, it's a really serious piece of work.
Yeah, thank you. I wrote pretty much every piece of text on there.
Wow, that must have driven you completely insane. I recognize just like how much thought has gone into this.
Yeah, going pretty good. Like, yeah, the last couple of weeks it's been accelerating really fast because it's been going on for over a year now, and the first obviously it's been really slow in the beginning. I started getting more and more people and actually getting people to believe in this thing, and just getting the basic infrastructure up, getting the first tokens minted, getting the market up, and all that. But
You've got clients, right? I mean, this thing is actually solving problems for customers now.
the customers. There is no customer. It's just a community, basically.
Right, next, old man thinking, customer. So,
Yeah, we sell meaning among other things, I guess. Meaning as a service.
meaning is a service. Where did you come from again? Ah, the future. It's filled with weirdos. Yeah, meaning as a service. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Yeah, this is how you know I'm getting old. Like, wait, meaning as a service? Oh my god, these awful children. That's fantastic.
But yeah, the quote-unquote customers are the people who are interested in building decentralized organizations and applications, and are generally interested in building a better future. So, the main selling point, I still think, is the community itself. Like, people want to be here for the community. They want to meet other cool people and exchange ideas and build things together. But as of late, people also started getting a bunch of money out of it. So far, it's been everybody was getting tokens, but tokens weren't worth anything.
And now the tokens have started to be worth something. Wow. Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. We're going to be charging the access to the community, like monthly fees and things like that. And there's almost infinite ways to monetize the tokens itself, the digital services and products. So yeah, not worrying about that yet, just trying to build the basic infrastructure and tools, and we'll figure out the token stuff later. But yeah, it's been going pretty good.
Nice. I mean, I saw you had a huge number of people running around on the Discord. I mean, you've got a real community behind this thing.
Yeah, there's about 1,000 people in Discord, but only 170 or something out of them have the actual roles. So we got the players limited to the numbers number and the patrons as well. Partly because it's pretty easy to game source code feel, but mainly because I really want to build a tight community of really highly motivated people and not just bring anybody in. And when you have a limited number, then you know exactly what people you need to engage with instead of just buckshotting the whole community.
Yeah, absolutely. When you say patrons, what is a patron? Is a patron the same as a customer?
No, it's like an angel investor, I guess. So you get players and patrons, and players are the people that are working for the projects, and the patrons are people that are oh, this is so cool, but I don't have time to have this money.
Ah, I see. So Metagame is building actual things. So it's like a community that's going to produce a number of profitable enterprises?
Yeah, hopefully.
Got it.
Yeah, I guess our first product, well, beside what I'll talk about in a second, the first real product we're building are these profiles, which will be able to be used for other DAOs and people who want to have a decentralized profile page. it's sort of like LinkedIn, but you can use it for more things than LinkedIn itself, and you can like enter economic contracts with people directly through it, sell stuff on your page, have dApps integrated and whatnot. But I guess the core things that we built is this sort of playbook for bootstrapping the DAOs, which is that like use SourceCred for tracking contributions, then use Aragon for minting the tokens, and use Balancer for selling the tokens for exchanging them between the players and the people who want to support financially. And this sort of system, and like I'm writing a guide for the people who want to like also start their own companies in this way. It's a new way of bootstrapping it.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it took me a while to recognize this. So, a long time ago, again, here we are talking about the past again. A long time ago, there was a whole discussion about why, if markets are efficient, do corporations have command and control hierarchies inside of them rather than internal markets?
Right.
Right?
Trust.
Lots of reasons, right? And I think, I want to say Amazon has quite a robust culture internally with internal markets. But what I'm recognizing is that what you're building here is something which attempts to solve the same class of problems that corporations solve, but you're solving it using internal markets rather than solving it using hierarchy and command and control, roughly. So it's kind of like a corporation, but it's a corporation where you can recruit resources to your project by issuing tokens to the people that are working on the project from the pool of people that are inside of the single corporate hull, which is metagame.
And I think like this is where I made the separation. So the metagame is not the organization itself. So I made the separation that we are MetaFam and this is metagame. So like at some point in the future, like in phase 2, we will be just one of many organizations that are building and maintaining the metagame. So we're not it. And yeah, other than players and patrons, like the other main component are the guilds, which are basically just groups of people that can have either be like a development agency or a project. Although we're mostly trying to aim for the projects, I guess, because we're trying to integrate as many of the existing infrastructure to build this whole like puzzle of the world.
You might want to take a look at a thing called matrix management. I think that will help you figure out the relationship between the guilds and the development agencies. It was a big fad in corporate governance way back in the day. And the basic idea was you'd have like, if you think of like a hospital, you would have a management system for doctors, and you'd have a management system for administrators, and you'd have a management system for buildings. And then when you wanted to do something like create a new department, you would have a relationship between the new department, which would be like a project, and the doctor agency, and the administrator agency, and the building agency. And you'd bring resources from all those things together into your new building. Matrix management, there's an infinite amount of crap written about it. So this is really good. I mean, this has matured astonishingly from where it was the last time we talked about it. I mean, like, obviously you're still figuring out how to articulate the ideas, because things of this complexity, I mean, like, it's hard, right? Articulating things this complex is hard. Because you have to it's all about analogies, right? The model is clear inside of your head, but communicating it requires making analogies to things that other people know, and you need different analogies for different audiences. I think you've done really, really good work here in terms of identifying this notion that you have a thing which is kind of like a social operating system. Some materials on the site about values, ways of relating to other people, methodology, like there's all of this layer, then there's an economics layer, then there's an activities layer, and it's like, values, economic incentives, and activities, similar problem solving capacity to a conventional corporation, but run very strongly on internal markets and a different set of protocols, because we're not allocating resources by having a single centralized budget and a single tax accountant. We're allocating value inside of a system where people can create and mint their tokens pretty much dynamically to solve problems, kind of, sort of. Yeah, it's great. It's really, really impressive. Good work.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that's like one of the main selling points is that other than Like what we do differently than all the other tokens, which they sell the tokens, then they use the money to pay people to do the work. So they basically selling the promise of future work. What we are doing is like the tokens are only created for existing work, so for previous work. So there is no tokens being sold for like future work, it's all past work. So that's kind of solves the problem of like will they deliver.
Takes a huge amount of risk out of it. Also probably has the nice side effect that there's a decent chance those tokens are not securities.
That's good. I wanted to touch on your previous point. Like when I first started it, like in the very beginning, I was saying, okay, it's like Twitter meets LinkedIn meet the World of Warcraft. Then I was just explaining it as like a real life MMORPG, and that was still like I came up with the concept of a massive online coordination being like fairly soon, but I wasn't really using it because I thought like people won't be able to relate, and I'm still not sure that they do. But I started using it more. Comparisons to the existing stuff, I just call it a massive online coordination game, and I hope that people pick it up. And I kind of see Wikipedia as the first MacG. What do you think about this concept?
So you've got Wikipedia and you've got Linux, and both Wikipedia and Linux have generated unbelievable amounts of value for people that were not tightly associated with those games. Like the open source ecosystem is at this point worth, probably $1 trillion just for the software, and then another $500 billion for all the cryptocurrencies that are built in open source ways. And that's big. I mean, that's like, you could say the open source world is a very substantial part of, it's a very substantial fraction of the size of Apple. But also a huge amount of Apple's value comes directly from the open source world because, for example, macOS underneath the hood is BSD, right? Yeah, it's BSD. I want to say free BSD. So, Apple is both a part of the open source ecosystem, but it's also, like, the open source ecosystem is probably larger than Apple if we remember that Apple is part of the open source ecosystem. So the idea that you're building out the interface between the pre-existing open source software development methodologies and the crypto world so that you wind up producing open source software in a manner that, is like the next evolution beyond Git and GitHub seems like an extremely compelling idea. I mean, okay, GitHub and Git were revolutions in the open source world because they enabled projects to be decentralized pretty effectively. Decentralized version control was a big deal, and that's all cryptography. I mean, it's really heavy use of crypto to make Git and GitHub work properly. It's all keys and key signing and, which key has access to which devices, and it's all SSH keys. Git itself, you're constantly sending around cryptographic hashes for the software to identify state. So the fact that we've never had a payment layer for open source software development is one of the things which has held us back, because every time you want to put together an international team to solve problems together, you got to figure out how to get so how do I pay this programmer in Venezuela for working on this project with us? Did you say Venezuela?
Yeah, I'm not I wasn't previously so much into open source software itself, and I'm still not, it's not what gets me hyped, but I just think that if we're building a new world, it has to be open source. And especially if we're building out this huge sort of gamified system where it could potentially turn out ugly, if people that come into power turn it into some sort of a hamster wheel sort of situation. And we definitely need the ability for other people to just be okay, I'm starting a new metagame, fuck this. And yeah, that's the idea, that other people will be able to start their own, and potentially even when we build all the basic infrastructure, even some corrupt third world countries could use it to start their own metagame, run the government.
I mean, what you're really talking about is economic activity without command and control systems.
Right.
And you've dug down a few layers, because the original sort of nonsense days of the DAO, right? There was a whole bunch of early stage Ethereum nonsense about DAOs and how DAOs were going to change everything. And for the most part, those were things that were easily identifiable as this is a collective investment vehicle, this is a hedge fund, this is a whatever it is. like, they didn't really produce any new economic activity other than just shuffling risk around. And I think as a result of that, those things were sort of easy to understand as basically being financial instruments masquerading as communities. Whereas what you're talking about is like, look, we have an actual primary productive activity, which is that people do work on things, and then we reward the work with tokens, and the tokens become valuable if the things become valuable. Okay. Like, that sounds like people are working for money. Yeah, people are definitely working for money. Okay, and who's in charge? Well, we don't really have an in charge. It's sort of like open source, only even more decentralized. This begins to sound like a different thing. You know what I'm saying? It's not the old DAO model. It's a new thing.
Right. Yeah, it seems like more and more people are thinking about DAOs just as like architectural decentralization, like the software layer, but they are still building like the shareholder corporation on top of it. So I think there's going to be a big culture clash between the people who expected DAOs to be like decentralized governance and the people who think of DAOs, okay, I'm just going to use this to build a normal company.
Yeah, I mean, when we say decentralized governance, like, that term means different things to different people. When some people hear that said, what they immediately think of is shareholder democracy. Lots of people come together, they vote for what's going to happen, that's what happens, but you have a single hierarchical control structure which implements the decisions which are made in a democratic way. And that approach is not a great way forward, because all it really means is that you've got command and control, but you've got many people's hands on the command rudder. And what we really want is we want something which is not like command and control. We want something which is largely governed by the people doing the work. And there's a long history of this kind of stuff. Like, do you know about the Spanish anarchists? So 40s anarcho-syndicalists, for the folks that haven't heard about this, they basically took over ownership of the factories, and they directly transferred ownership of the factories to the workers in the factories. So it was just like, okay, I'm sorry, you used to own this factory, you don't own the factory anymore, the workers are now in charge. And the workers then organised themselves into a series of interlocking committees to enable the factory to function, and then the factories still bought and sold goods and labour for money. So what you had was structures which were externally parts of a market economy, but were internally owned by the people that were actors inside of the system. And in a sense, what you're doing is you're building anarcho-syndicalist economics for the development of blockchain systems. But, like, people don't really talk about anarcho-syndicalism anymore, even though the fundamental truth of history is that nearly all of the smart people are anarcho-syndicalists.
It's been so neglected that, like, I came up with the idea of anarcho-collectivism, and then, like, I thought, obviously that has to exist already. Like, it exists. But sure enough, as soon as I googled it, it's okay, there's anarcho-syndicalism. Okay, this is exactly what we're doing. Like, they're against private ownership over the means of production, but they're also against the government.
The anarcho-syndicalists don't even have to be against the government, right? If the government keeps the electricity running and keeps the water running and stops people shooting each other in the streets, the anarcho-syndicalists have no problems with the government. They just think eventually it will be another thing that will become a syndicate. There aren't many people that you can say, hey, we're building software to support anarcho-syndicalist economic democracies. There aren't many people you can say that to and have their eyes light up, but, that is actually what you're doing, and it's super impressive. It's really, really good. And I think, if you work with the right kinds of lawyers, there's, what's the name of that large collective of blockchain lawyers again? What's it called? Koala. The thing that Primavera is such a big part of? Coala. Koala. Primavera de Filippi. So the Koala folks, because you're giving people tokens in exchange for work, I think with a little bit of work on the legal side, you might be able to make sure those things are not securities. I think they might technically be coupons, and then there's a decent chance that if the entity that issues the coupons is on paper a legal liability corporation, you might be able to get legal liability protection for the people that are working on these projects so that they're not carrying joint and several liability. Right? Because you're paying tokens for work, these things are basically coupons rather than being necessarily equity. Maybe, you might have made a very good decision saying that, these are coupons that people are given in exchange for labor. That might resolve a whole bunch of the problems that normally cause people to think of these as being securities. It's definitely worth doing some research.
Tokens. Right, labor tokens. That's a good pointer. Yeah, they say that in DAOs, like the DAOs that don't have any legal structure, like all members are liable, like fully liable for the whatever happens by the DAO.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, there was a time when that might have applied to all Ethereum token holders. Right? There was a possibility until the regulators made some decisions that everybody that owned Ether might have actually been seen as being members of a single enormous corporation, which was pretty scary. So I should probably go in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, we went over a lot of time, for sure. But it was great fun, and yeah, thank you for joining us. This was pretty awesome, and I hope that our listeners will get their minds blown.
Yeah, this was really good. And yeah, I mean, I'm really impressed with the work that you're doing in terms of this kind of, new economic syndicates kind of model. You've thought really hard about it. I think you're producing the right level of resources. Social practices, some technology, some economics. Like, it doesn't look like you're neglecting any of the parts of the system. And I'm guessing a year from now, this thing will be really, really rolling along at a right old pace of knots. Good work. Really good work.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And yeah, consider coming to claim your seeds.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I got to say, like, we're going to need a bunch of development work doing on Mattereum. And, we could certainly consider bringing some of that stuff into this ecosystem as like, okay, we need the following problem solved. Somebody indicate how they're going to do it. It might be a viable development model for us for some of our work.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And I mean, Mattereum itself, like, definitely sounds like one of the building blocks for this brave new world. That's why I asked you about whether the shop already exists. Like, maybe we can just integrate that straight in.
Yeah, I mean, we can do asset passports now for objects. The exchangeability. If somebody came and said, "Hey, we need to buy and sell things tomorrow," we could do it in a week or two. It's not the most urgent thing because we're building out a bunch of other stuff. We're onboarding some really crazy things. But yeah, I mean, it's doable. It's doable. Really lovely talking to you, man. I'm really glad we did that.
You too, man. Very good. And yeah, keep in touch, man.